Vanakkam. Hello friends. We have been seeing about the polity and the social life of the Tamil people of the Sangam era, and before we go into the foundations of the three great monarchies of the Cheras, the Cholas and the Pandyas, we are going to take a detour and travel back in time to understand the migration of the Aryans into the Tamil country. Why, when and how did Vedic Aryans come into Tamil country? Why is this important given the influence of Vedic Aryans on the customs and culture, the religion and rituals, polity and state and the language and literature of the Tamil people, an influence that saw a continuing ascendancy culminating in the Dravidian movement almost 2000 years later, and more importantly because traces of this influence are seen in the Sangam literary works as well as the Tolkappiyam itself. This is a crucial aspect of history that we need to explore and understand in its pan-Indian context. We have seen in detail in previous episodes of the Indo-Aryan migration that happened into the subcontinent starting from around the 2nd millennium BCE, of how the Indo-Aryans came into the BMAC, that is the Bacteria Margina Archaeological Complex in today's Afghanistan, through the Swat Valley, crossed the Hindu Kush mountains and came into the north of the continent, and as shown in the accompanying map, arriving into the Indian subcontinent a few centuries later, coinciding with the decline of the Indus Valley civilization. I request that you view the episodes 36, 37 and 38 that details this Indo-Aryan migration to better understand their southward journey that we are about to explore now. By collaborating archaeological findings with several interdisciplines such as archaeogenetics, the study of ancient DNA, and archaeolinguistics that uses linguistic tools to work back in time to study how languages evolve, the direction of migration of the Indo-Aryans into the subcontinent has been established without any ambiguity, though there is a continuing effort to propagate the out-of-India theory to establish India as the birthplace of the Indo-European language family, renaming the Harappan civilization as Saraswati civilization, and trying to establish a timeless Vedic culture as native to this land. All these theories today have been debunked by archaeology with the aid of science and technology. Dropping the Indo prefix, we have seen in previous episodes as to how this prefix came about. The term Arya meaning a nobleman from the root word Aryan, Ayr being its westernmost outpost where it becomes Ireland, and the old Iranian genitive plural Aryanam meaning the land of the Aryans, becoming shortened into the country name of Iran. All these having common cognates. To understand how and when the migration of the Aryans happened from the northern part of the subcontinent to the south of the Vindhyas into the Deccan and into the peninsular part and Tamil country, we need to go back to the 2nd millennium BCE, around the time of the decline of the Indus Valley civilization that happened between 1800 and 1600 BCE. We have explored the connect between the Indus Valley and Dravidian civilization in detail in several episodes. The hallmark of this ancient civilization with its well-planned citadels, the streets and the town planning, uniform weights and measures used throughout the spread of the civilization, and great civic amenities was its centralized administration. We do not know whether the Harappan civilization was a theocratic state, meaning that a priest class ruled in the name of God. Who was this figurine with Mongolian features? Was he a priest king or just a nobleman? But the lack of remnants glorifying a single ruler as in a palace or a monument points to a more egalitarian society probably administered by a council of elders who lived in their citadels, and probably a peaceful society as conspicuous by its absence in archaeological finds are weapons of war. Following the gradual decline of the Harappan civilization starting 1800 BCE, excavations in Mohenjo-daro show mansions becoming tenements, street planning is no longer followed, potters' kilns are found right within the city limits. The central administration seemed to have totally lost control. In several regions such as Suktajandor, the most westernly output of the Harappan culture, some 480 kilometers west of Karachi in the province of Balochistan in today's Pakistan, excavations show clear evidence of the patterns of settlement of people from an intrusive culture that must have happened at a rapid pace. In his Wonder That Was India, A.L. Basham points out how, though there were no evidence of dangerous threats towards the end of the civilization, the fortification of walls around the citadel that were about 40 feet wide at the base going 35 feet height shows how one gateway was totally blocked, maybe on account of threats from a western direction. In the squatter settlements that were excavated at Chanhudaro of Lower Indus Valley, Harappan people were replaced by squatters living in small huts with fireplaces, suggesting that they came from colder climes. Though unsophisticated in many ways, while their pottery was crude, their weapons and tools were very sophisticated. Though going into further details is beyond our scope here, we will try to understand some of the major cultures that followed through the pottery that they used in order to understand the pattern and time period of these migratory settlements. The symmetry hedge culture of late Harappan phase, dated to between 1900 BCE and 1300 BCE, was a Bronze Age culture located in and around the Punjab, most of which is in today's Pakistan. In his work, The Roots of Hinduism, the Early Aryans and Indus Civilization, Asko Parpola shows how the symmetry age culture represents a first wave of Indo-Aryans who migrated as early as 1900 BCE, predating the migration of the Rigvedic people. A notable feature was the cremation of the dead, which was absent in the Indus Valley. A second wave migrated into the Punjab between 1700 and 1400 BCE, and they had what was known as the OCP pottery culture, the ochre colored pottery, and together with the Gandhara grave culture, also known as the Swat Valley culture, which itself is dated to between 1900 and 1500 BCE, these cultures overlapped with one another and formed the foundation of Vedic culture. Asko Parpola explains all this in great detail in his book. We have seen a few references from this book in earlier episodes where Parpola explains how the terms of description of the river Saraswati in early Rigveda perfectly match the descriptions of a river flowing through Afghanistan that is today known as the Argandab and the Helmand, which earlier went by the old Iranian name Haraksati or Haraivadi, where the Harsa variation made it the Saraswati, carried forward memories recorded in the Rig Veda. As we are attempting to understand Tamil history by correlating archaeological finds with the Sangam literary works, so also in the north, researchers have tried to corroborate references in the priestly works, the earliest of which is the Rig Veda, to archaeological sites. The Vedas to Brahmanas to the Upanishads may be seen as a period of transition from prehistory to history, points out A.L. Basham. The Rig Veda was preserved and passed on by oral tradition by the priestly class, for whom Bharatavarsha or Brahmavarda, their first home, was the land between the Satluj and the Yamuna Doab. Though there are no synchronisms contained in the Rig Veda itself to ascertain a time period, much of it was probably composed and collated between 1400 and 1000 BCE. Just as in the case of Tamil literature, many of the local folklore and tales were absorbed into the later compilations. Geographical descriptions of places in the Rig Veda clearly attest to the shifting homeland. Early Vedic poets knew the Himalayas but not the Vindhyas, and the holy Ganga itself gets mentioned only once. Many hymns in the Rig Veda refer to battles between the Aryans and the indigenous tribes known as the Dasyus or the Dasas, described as dark-skinned, snub-nosed and bull-lipped, which sort of reminds us of our African ancestry, and the clincher, the ill worshippers of Sisnadeva, the phallus deity, the Linga, who lived in fortified settlements and were cattle-rich. The hymns speak of how their primary deity Indra destroyed many of these Dasa settlements. The term Dasa in classical Sanskrit meant a slave or a bondman, and its female equivalent Dasi meant a slave girl. The Aryans were a nomadic pastoral people for whom cattle was wealth. Warriors expected cattle as booty. Tribesmen prayed for more riches, namely more cattle, that was Lakshmi, which was a very cumbersome medium of exchange. The priest was also rewarded for his services with cattle. Cattle was slaughtered for food and for sacrifices, but it was the asva, the horse, that was a symbol of their military prowess and hence was more important. Their rituals included intoxicants such as the soma and the sura. They delighted in gambling, which also finds a mention in the Rig Veda. Eventually, the Aryans married indigenous women and their children were bilingual. We will see more about this later. A cultural amalgamation was inevitable, and non Aryan influence on religion and culture must have occurred very early on. Numerous words in the Rig Veda do not have any connecting roots with the Indo European language. Several clans and chieftains are mentioned in the Rig Veda, but there is only one king who comes across as a historical personality, King Sudas of the Bharadas tribe, who ruled over the land of the Punjab. Three hymns in the Rig Veda describe King Sudas defeating a coalition of 10 tribes of the Punjab and Northwest province on the banks of the river Parushni, which is the modern Ravi. The most powerful of these 10 tribes were the Purus, who were the western neighbors of the Bharatas, and their king Purukutsa was apparently killed in the Battle of the 10 Kings. Then the two tribes merged and a new clan known as the Kurus emerged, a clan around whom later traditions wove unreliably grand stories. According to Asko Porpola, it was the Kuru clan that emerged very powerful. Starting from around 1400 BCE, a new pottery culture, the black and red ware pottery culture, is seen over a large spread of the Indian subcontinent, and its presence continues for well over 1,000 years. While in the south, the black and red ware culture continued well up to the Common Era, as we see in excavations at Adichanallur and Kiradi continuously throwing up BRW pottery. In the north, the black and red ware culture was followed by or merged into the PGW culture, the painted greyware pottery. Associated with megalithic graves dated between 1000 BCE and 600 BCE, the painted greyware pottery is characterized by a style of fine grey pottery painted with geometric patterns in black. More than 1100 PGW sites have been excavated along the northern banks of the Ganga. Why the northern banks? During the early Vedic period, the Gangetic plain was a swampy jungle unfit for occupation and cultivation, with the river changing course very frequently. Hence, the expansion of the Aryans happened eastwards along the foothills of the Himalayas. Although most of the PGW sites were small farming villages, later on some of them grew on to become larger settlements that one could call towns. The first Kuru capital was Asandivat, identified with modern Asand in Haryana. As opposed to the 30-odd tribes mentioned in early Rig Veda, the Brahmanas speak mostly of the Kurus and their allies, the Panchalas. The Kurus end up controlling the land of the Paradas, which was the land between the Ravi and the Yamuna, and as the PGW culture extended into middle and late Vedic period, the Kuru Panchala kingdom emerged as the first large state in the Indian subcontinent after the decline of the Indus Valley civilization. Kuru kings ruled with the assistance of a rudimentary administration but had advanced military prowess. Ruled by a chief known as a Raja, related to the Latin root reg from which comes the term regiment, he was assisted by a Senapati who was in charge of military expeditions, which during those initial times were mostly cattle raids. There was a Sabha of headmen to dispense with the administration. The rulers extracted mandatory tributes known as Bali from both commoners as well as weak neighbors. Most important in this societal setup was the chief priest known as the Prohita, who by his sacrifices ensured the prosperity of the kingdom during peace and victory in war. Though the tribes were initially semi-nomadic and pastoral, as they shifted into the western Gangetic plains, they became farming communities, and there are references in the Vedic hymns as to the surplus of production of barley and rice and the emergence of specialized artisans and craftsmen. Iron is mentioned for the first time by the terms Krishna Ayas, meaning black copper. Iron was first mentioned as Shyama Ayas in the Atharva Veda texts that started appearing during this period. Another important development was that of the fourfold classification of casteism known as the Varna system. Varna, a term that simply meant color, was later meant as caste and probably came from identifying with the color of the skin of the native indigenous stock as compared to the fair Aryans. The Brahmin priesthood at the top, followed by the Kshatriya warrior clan, then came the commoners, the Vaishyas, followed by the Sudras, who were the Dasa laborers. All through the Rigvedic period, this casteism was given religious sanction and was crystallized. Now, the Aryans excelled in creating stories, the Puranas. A very clever ploy employed by them was throwing in actual historical places and persons into their narrative, blurring the line between fact and fiction, throwing in supernatural elements for good measure. A ploy that they continued very effectively when they came into the Tamil country, about which we will see in detail later. All of which is fine as long as people understand these Puranas for what they are, mythology. All through the Vedic period, indiscriminate usage of the terms sons of Bharadas, sons of Kurus went on to reach epic proportions. Some of the old cities like Hastinapura and Kausambi have been dug up by archaeologists, but there was nothing there to understand the social setup, the time period or polity, like who ruled and when. Later literature refers to Indraprastha, identified with modern Delhi, and Hastinapura as the main Kuru cities. Hastinapura, meaning city of elephants, an actual city, gets woven into the great story of the Mahabharata as the capital city of the Kuru clan. And according to post-Vedic Sanskrit literature, after Hastinapura was destroyed by floods, the capital of the Kuru clan gets shifted to Kausambi in the lower Doab, the region around modern Delhi, Kurukshetra, where the famed war of the Mahabharata is said to have taken place, not recorded in historical sources but only in local folklore. The war was probably magnified to titanic proportions over time, and several names of Kuru clan rulers could have been that of local chieftains, but only two of them are related to historical personages who find references in other contemporary literary sources, namely Parikshit and Janamejaya. The Atharva Veda praises Parikshit as the king of the Kurus and the great ruler of a thriving, prosperous realm, and other later Vedic texts such as the Shatapada Brahmana commemorate Parikshit's son Janamejaya as a great conqueror who performed the Ashwamedha, the horse sacrifice. These two Kuru kings are shown as playing a decisive role in consolidating the Kuru state and appear as important figure in the later legends of the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata itself is believed to have been compiled over a long time period starting from around 900 BCE and not composed by a sage, mostly from indigenous folk tales that prevailed over a wide geographic region. Some of the names of the heroes found in the Mahabharata may have been that of contemporary chieftains who ruled over North India. Parpola draws on several parallels in European mythology on plots and concepts and shows how the Mahabharata storyline undergoes several changes in the later compilations to accommodate then political ideologies. This itself makes for a very fascinating study, which we could probably take up in a separate episode. Eventually, the Kuru tribe were defeated by the non-Vedic Salva tribe, with which the center of Vedic culture shifted east into the kingdom of the Panchalas in today's Uttar Pradesh. The Panchala king, Kesin Dalbya, was the nephew of the late Kuru king, and by the 6th century BCE, the Kuru dynasty evolved into the Kuru and the Vatsa Janapadas, ruling over the upper Doab, Delhi, Haryana and the lower Doab respectively. The Vatsa branch of the Kuru dynasty gets further divided into branches at Kausambi, and at Madura on the banks of the river Yamuna, the Yadava clan make settlements. Jana meaning people and Pada meaning the area around which they prevailed. The Janapadas were the starting of the formation of kingdoms, many of which overlapped with the period of the Buddha, a very important period in the history of the subcontinent, which saw the emergence of major non Vedic kingdoms, about which we will continue to see in the next episode. Vanakkam.